Welcome to episode number 16 of the Blitz Take. I am here with Ohio State football reporter Patrick Murphy, and I'm happy to have him on to talk Ohio State football. So welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
So my first question is, what are your thoughts heading into the season?
Well, I think you look at where the Buckeyes are ranked. We just saw the AP poll come out this past week. And obviously, Ohio State, high expectations as always, but up there at number 2, just behind Alabama, that sets the bar, outside of the program as well, that this is a team that can likely contend for a national championship. And after last season, where Ohio State didn't win the Big Ten for the first time, and I think it was 4 years, didn't make the college football playoff, that's something that they want to get back to both of those things. So my expectation is on par with that this is a team that certainly has the talent to, again, win the Big Ten and at least make the playoff, if not make another run to the national championship game. But, there's obviously still some questions to be answered, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. And while we've gotten to see some of fall camp and talk to players and coaches and whatnot, we're really not going to have a great answer until we get to see the team September 3rd on the field against Notre Dame.
What are your thoughts on CJ Stroud?
Obviously, a fantastic year. His first year starting last season after serving as Justin Fields' backup in 2020. This was a guy who didn't throw a pass his freshman year. So coming into last year, there were some struggles early, but I think he had some issues with his shoulder. He got that sorted out and he settled into the game. I mean, what can you say? That the guy was a Heisman Trophy finalist, right? And I've written about this a couple times this offseason. He played 2 fewer games because he missed the game earlier in the season and he didn't play in a conference championship game than either of the other 2 quarterbacks that were also Heisman Trophy finalists. And if you kind of project out his numbers, adding 2 more games in based on his averages, he's right there or ahead of both Kenny Pickett or Bryce Young. So it would have been interesting to see if Stroud had played all of those games where he ends up. He finished 4th in the Heisman voting. So I think that's why a lot of people really like what he brings to the table this year. I think another year under Ryan Day and Corey Dennis with Ohio State is only going to make him better. I think he's put in a lot of work. He was just named a Buckeye captain this offseason. So obviously, as a quarterback, you're already in a leadership position, but I think that just shows that he's really stepped into that role even more than he did a year ago. I think it's going to be a big year. If I was a betting man, I would probably put it on CJ Stroud. And that's mostly because, I think he's really talented and that he's been there before, but also the fact that I think Bryce Young is going to be judged, more harshly, so to speak, as the returning Heisman Trophy winner. Obviously we've only seen a repeat Heisman Trophy winner once, and it seems like you have to outdo your previous year by a lot. And so I think that'll affect Bryce Young, but I think Stroud's going to be one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the country this year. And obviously that's good news for Ohio State's offense.
What are your thoughts on around the conference and everything that is going to go as planned?
It'll be interesting to see, and it's always interesting with the Big Ten outside of, Ohio State, Michigan, most years. Penn State obviously has been a consistent contender for the Big Ten, just to see kind of how things play out. I think everyone projects Ohio State to be the Big Ten East winners. Michigan obviously has a shot. They have to come to Ohio Stadium at the end of the season, and that would not surprise me if that game is like it was last year for the Big Ten East. I do like what Penn State has, even though they've had a couple of down years by some of the standards that they set under James Franklin. And in the West, I think it's wide open. Wisconsin certainly is an interesting team. They also come to Ohio Stadium fairly early in the year. Iowa is a team that I like a lot as well. If we're looking for kind of a under the radar team or two, Minnesota, I think is interesting. They've got a lot of talent coming back. They had a lot of experience last year. I remember when Ohio State played them week 1, just looking at kind of the veterans on their depth chart, and they've got a lot of those guys still coming back. So that's a team that can make some noise and maybe surprise people. I'll also be interested in Northwestern. just because it seems every couple of years, and this kind of tracks if you look at it, Northwestern has that year where they just find a way to get to the Big Ten championship game. And some of the years that's been because of what Northwestern's done. And some years it's just been off years by other teams and Northwestern's taken advantage. So Northwestern had a down year last year. If we're following the trend, does Northwestern, make a push in the West and maybe get to Indianapolis? So that's kind of my breakdown. But I think the West is wide open. I think the East, much more probably a 2-horse race between Ohio State, Michigan, maybe Penn State in the mix as well, depending on how things play out.
What are your thoughts on the incoming freshmen?
For Ohio State?
Yeah.
It's a good class. I don't know how many of these guys will play right away just because of the number of guys Ohio State has returning from last season, but certainly a class that Ohio State is going to build with into the future. I think it was I'm pulling up the actual rankings here. A top 5 class in the country last year, according to 247 Sports Composite, ranked number 4 overall. CJ Hicks is the guy that is probably the biggest name. He's a 5-star linebacker from Dayton, Ohio. He's actually one of the few guys that I think, well, not few guys, but one of the guys that could have a bigger role than maybe expected this season just because of his talent. Ohio State is pretty deep at linebacker, but we've already heard a lot of positive things about CJ Hicks and kind of coming in physically ready to perform. That's something you hear a lot with linebackers, that, you just have to be big enough, strong enough, those type of things at the college level. Beyond him, another guy that sort of made waves in the spring was Caden Curry, the defensive end. Ohio State likes to rotate a lot on the defensive line, so I could certainly see him being part of the mix. But going beyond this next season, Devin Brown's a quarterback who, top 6 quarterback in the country in that class, that's going to contend when CJ Stroud leaves, which we all assume will be after this season, with Kyle McCord for that starting job. The Buckeyes landed another really impressive group of wide receivers: Keon Graves, Caleb Burton, just to name a few. There's a couple other guys. Sonny Styles, a safety, who is probably going to end up moving down to linebacker. He's just a ridiculous athlete, and they started him at safety, but I could imagine him ending his career as playing linebacker. And then another guy that made a lot of noise in the spring was Kai Stokes, who was not a highly rated prospect. He was a athlete, but they're playing him at safety out of Florida. And he was somebody that got a lot of pub in the spring. He was working with the 3rd team defense when we were able to watch practice, but he's a guy that maybe not this year, but in the future is a name to keep in mind.
What are your thoughts on the defense?
That is a good question, because that is probably the single most reason Ohio State didn't come out and play in the Big Ten championship, win the Big Ten championship last year, and go to the playoff once again. It was bad. Just kind of seeing, especially watching that Oregon game early on in the year, and then obviously the game at Michigan, the mistakes that were made. Ryan Day clearly understood that. As soon as the season was over, before they even played in the Rose Bowl, he was making changes to the Buckeye staff, brought in Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State, who got the Cowboys to a top 5 defense last year. And that's in the Big 12, where offense is generally king. They've also brought in Tim Walton to run the secondary, be cornerbacks coach. He was coaching down in Jacksonville, worked with guys like Jalen Ramsey and names like that in the NFL. And then Perry Eliano, who was at Cincinnati last year as the cornerbacks coach, he's coaching safeties at Ohio State. He worked with 2 All-Americans at Cincinnati. And obviously that Cincinnati team was the first group of 5 team to make it to the college football playoff, and a defense was a big part of that. So the staff has been remade. The scheme is going to be different. They're going to play Jim Knowles kind of 4-2-5 with a sort of hybrid defensive end in there. He calls it the jack position, hybrid linebacker, defensive end. And the idea is to really confuse offenses. And that's, from what we've heard throughout fall camp, has been done. And, obviously this is a good offense to go up against every day in practice. Ohio State had a scrimmage just this past weekend, and from everything that we heard about it, the defense really showed up, made some big plays. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I don't know how good the defense absolutely has to be to get Ohio State back to where they want to go. There certainly needs to be steps, in the right direction. I think they were 59 overall statistically in terms of total defense last year and yards allowed. I think that probably needs to jump up into the top 30s. But the biggest thing for me is, can you get the big stops? Can you not let plays that are sort of routine, which we saw in those losses against Oregon and Michigan, become detrimental, and get the ball back for that offense, which we all believe is going to be very high powered. So even if they're making steps to a top 30, top 20 defense, I know Ryan Day said top 10, Jim Knowles has said top 5, but I think that's, just preseason talk. And if they can get there, then they're going to be really good. But I think with the way we expect this offense to be, you can just be top 30 and get those stops, get the ball back to the offense, then the Buckeyes are in pretty good shape.
All right, it's going to be very interesting to see how they progress once the season comes. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on. And I hope to have you back on to recap a game or something.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.